At the end of my sophomore year of college, I developed an eating disorder. It didn't have a name at first because it grew so slowly that I didn't realize it was there until the spark had become a flame. What set off my disordered eating was a comment made by my mom. But honestly, the blame isn't on her. The fodder for the fire had been there all along. Anything could have lit it. I was visiting home in the spring, and she surprised me with the new dress. I still remember what it looked like. Alternating stripes of cream and yellow, and shaped like an hourglass. I always used to scrutinize my figure in the mirror, and that day was no exception. I saw the way those sunny colors folded into the softness of my stomach and thighs, and I hated it. Still, I stepped out of the room to show her the dress. Her response upon seeing me was, "Wow, you've gained weight, and it shows." I had suspected that was the case, but her comment confirmed my fear. I don't remember how I responded, but I examined my eating habits later that day and decided that I hadn't been eating enough protein. There were too many carbs in the dining hall, and from now on, I would have to avoid them. I also started going to the gym. This was a big deal. For as long as I can remember, I had hated exercise. As a child, my parents signed me up for every sport imaginable. Gymnastics, tennis, ice skating, basketball, swimming, soccer. I didn't take to anything. The only activity I ever enjoyed was dance, where a handful of us would gather once a week in a room with no mirrors and a wooden floor and spring from end to end like antelope. Working out in college was never for pleasure. I would hop on the elliptical and I wouldn't climb off until I had reached my calorie goal or my time goal or both. At this point, sophomore year had ended and it was the summer. I had subtracted a major food group from my diet and added joyless exercise to my routine. But my mental health was more or less the same. In hindsight, I realized that I had been hanging out at the top of a mountain peak and that the start of junior year shoved me down the slope. As soon as classes started, I decided that I no longer had time to work out. So I'd have to restrict my intake even more strictly to maintain my ideal weight. Spoiler, there is no ideal. My dissatisfaction with my body was internal. No external scale was going to change that. I went from eating less carbs to eating absolutely none. The dining hall closest to me had limited options at each meal, and there were times when I would pick the cheese off the pizza because that was the only thing they were serving, and I was afraid of what the dough and the crust would do to my body. This restricting was coupled with overeating. Often late at night, alone in my dorm room, where no one could catch me eating fistful after fistful of food. My arms felt like puppets being controlled by a string. Night after night, I would try and fend off the onslaught of food, but something outside my control wouldn't let me. I also started using a calorie counter. I had always loved numbers, but this counter mutated them into something malignant. I no longer knew how to respond to the signals of hunger and fullness that my body gave me. I could only listen to the numbers that the app spit out. Still hungry? Too bad. You've already hit your max. Too full? Keep eating. There are still some calories left, and who knows when you'll be able to eat this much again. This triad of restricting, overeating, and calorie counting extended well into my junior year, my mind becoming less concerned with what I was supposed to be learning for class, or how to be present as a friend or daughter, and more concerned with what food groups I should be avoiding. A quick aside, I went and saw a doctor twice during my descent into disordered eating. The first time was to my primary care provider. I had booked the appointment for an unrelated reason, but after I was weighed, I felt frightened and confessed that I had dipped so low because I had cut out carbs. He commended me, saying, "Potatoes are unhealthy, and that the weight loss isn't that concerning because it was intentional." The second time was to the OBGYN. I went to 3 separate providers because no one could tell me why I hadn't had a period in 9 months. No one asked me what I was eating, and the third physician chastised me for seeking multiple opinions. I was not helped by medical professionals. What sparked my recovery was a flyer on campus I saw one afternoon about a psychology study recruiting people with disordered eating habits and negative body image. I ripped a tab off the sheet of paper and called the coordinator to enroll myself. When I showed up to the intake appointment a week later, I was terrified. What if they didn't think I was sick enough to participate? I needed to evict the eating disorder voice from my mind, and this was the only way I knew to enlist help. Turns out, there was no reason for me to be worried. After going through our psychiatry block in medical school, I realized that I more than met the criteria for an eating disorder. I worked on the program well into the summer, and when I returned to school for my senior year, I was eating all the food groups again, and I had started dancing. The program restored me to my normal activities, but it didn't tackle the root of my eating disorder, of which there are many. Society's unrealistic standards for how women should look, a lack of knowledge about how to set boundaries, and the tendency to be a perfectionist. It took me some time, but through a circuitous route, I started seeing a therapist that specialized in eating disorders after I graduated from college. When I moved to New York for medical school, I found another therapist through the Center for the Study of Anorexia and Bulimia, whom I continue to see today. I consider eating disorder recovery and cultivating body positivity to be a continuous process, and she has been invaluable in helping me with both.